All right, hello once again. I am Mike, bringing to you a guided tour of Foucault's Discipline and Punish. So let's get right back into it. This one's on the chapter The Gentle Way to Punish. And we've been talking about signs up until now, and I think he provides a pretty good little uh, synopsis of the previous chapter and a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today. So, bottom of page 104. He says, the ideal punishment would be transparent to the crime that it punishes. Thus, for him who contemplates it, it will be infallibly the sign of the crime that it punishes. And for him who dreams of the crime, the idea of the offense will be enough to arouse the sign of the punishment. Okay, so with these ideas spreading, punishment begins to appear natural. And since we all agree on the conventionality of a punishment, the condemned person appears to be paying a debt to society instead of the king or the sovereign. So instead of rule by terror, the new modern soul begins to self-govern. Punishment should, or it was believed that punishment should ultimately have an educating effect on society. And the way we learn to avoid crime and punishment was through this education. So the discourse of crime and punishment, the way we talk about crime and punishment, the actual talk itself becomes a tool that the law can use. So the idea of the prison was not accepted very easily because it didn't make sense and it appeared unnatural. For example, if you kidnapped a person and you held them captive and then you were caught, prison in that case made sense. It seemed that there was a natural link there. You take away someone else's freedom, so your punishment should be your freedom taken away. Prison for something like theft, though, it was difficult to see how prison was an appropriate form of punishment because the signs didn't link up naturally. So a chopped off hand links up more directly to theft. It's easier to understand this particular link. So prison was not easily accepted when we decided to stop torturing people or using horrible bodily punishments. On the surface, prison didn't seem to educate people about crime and punishment. And that education was an important aspect of the old system. So on the bottom of 102, Foucault talks about this old system and this debt to society, which was paid in two ways. So 109. Okay, here we go. And this is on public works. So public works meant two things: the collective interest in the punishment of the condemned man, and the visible, verifiable character of the punishment. Thus, the convict pays twice: by the labor he produces and by the signs that he produces. So, again, the signs he produces. He serves as a representation of the crime. He serves as a representation of punishment. And he also serves as a representation of an agreement by the society that this is an apt punishment. So each punishment should be a fable. And you don't get this fable by hiding criminals away in prisons. But ultimately, the prison did offer a new utility. It offered a chance to reform prisoners, to get criminals back into the routine of working. And the idea was that once released, they could fit back into a general economic system of labor. This set of ideas had its own productive effects. For example, you had to give time to prisoners to learn how to work again, to be reformed, which potentially lengthens their time in prison. We started using models that would reform the body, correct the soul, and alter minds. Because we had new goals for the prisoner, we had to start figuring out what kind of imprisonment would work on who. So it became necessary to collect more and more detailed information on each prisoner and divide up prisoners into particular dispositions. In this sense, each prisoner became an object of knowledge, something that could be known and adjusted and corrected through specific techniques. So we individualized punishment while individualizing the prisoners themselves. And the ultimate goal was to create an obedient subject. That's on page 128. So this brings us to the next chapter, docile bodies, and the production of docile bodies. This is maybe a pretty straightforward chapter, so it's not going to get its own video. But this is one of the most important chapters in Foucault's work. You'll hear docile bodies in Foucault talk a lot. Now, there are a couple of things we should keep in mind when we read this chapter. First, when he talks about scale. So on the bottom of 136, I'm going to read that to you guys. Here we go. To begin with, there was the scale of the control. It was a question not of treating the body en masse or wholesale, as if it were in indissoluble unity, but in working it retail, individually, of exercising upon it a subtle coercion, of obtaining holds upon it at the level of the mechanism itself, movements, gestures, attitudes, rapidity, an infinitesimal power over the active body. So we began producing a specific set of knowledge, or an art of the human body. Pages 136 through 138 provide a very detailed summary of this chapter. So the body is broken down, divided into functions, from eye movement, hand gestures, standing up straight, all forms of bodily discipline, each a microphysics of power that culminate into a larger political anatomy. Now, remember, there are never principal causes, never one thing that shifts societal practices at once. At the bottom of 138, he describes it as a multiplicity of often minor processes in scattered locations which gradually produce a blueprint of a general method. So, Foucault pulls on examples from very different parts of society, on purpose and a lot in this book. It's part of the reason that this book is so long, and at times it's a little bit tedious to read. He seems to be citing like random dudes, lists of names and dates from here and there, a quote from this or that publication from this institution. All these different places, from secondary schools to military theory to hospitals. But what he is producing is a general outline of the kind of talk or discourse that was pretty common. So when he says there was an overall strategy without a strategist, this is it. No principal strategist. Now, what's disturbing is, according to Foucault, this is how power operates in general. In general. So when we think of power, when we think of hierarchy, top-down power, that is repressive power, or negative power, he is really just saying that that is just one way power works, and it might not even be the most important way. What's more important than negative power is positive power. So he goes over several techniques that produces the individual. For example, enclosure, partitioning, which might work through the architecture of buildings. In this sense, the materiality of buildings and the arrangement of space is part of what the conversation or the discourse was about. It was part of this process of individualization. Now, looking toward what this produces and thinking of chains of effects into the distant future. As you individualize people, this produces the need for new forms of organization. Each individual must fit into the whole, or else you just have a mass of individuals running around. So we had to rank individuals into a hierarchy. Each individual will become useful in a way to the next type of individual. And this was accomplished through a variety of things, strict timetables, which was like the repetitive coding of the use of time. All of these different technologies emerged that were supposed to effectively train and produce individuals, ultimately producing the docile body or the obedient subject. So that's it for these two chapters. We'll see you guys in the next chapter.